Tonight, Lydia Axelrod, a distinguished retiree living in Longwood, a facility just like ours, will bring to life the character of Fanny Kemble, the renowned English actress and abolitionist who married Pierce Butler, a lawyer and plantation slave owner. Lydia's impressive career spans education, leadership, and philanthropy. She served as a superintendent both in New York and Pennsylvania, and tell them what the fifth.
I was the fifth woman and the first woman in northwestern Pennsylvania to attain the role of school superintendent, which is very exciting. And I'm enjoying this very much. And if there is anyone here who cannot hear me, please raise your hand as I am speaking.
Okay, all right. Okay, so there she was, a superintendent in both New York and Pennsylvania, and earned numerous accolades, such as being named Woman of the Year by the Business and Professional Women's Organization, and receiving an invitation to the White House from President Ronald Reagan in 1966. Beyond educational leadership, Lydia has dedicated over 2 decades to the Brandeis National Committee, holding roles like national chairman for the Sustaining the Mind Project, which raises funds for neurological research. Lydia was motivated to join the Brandeis National Committee after an invitation from her aunt to attend a BNC Lunch and Learn event, where she met a group of intellectually engaging women. This experience resonated with Lydia, who comes from a charitable family and was raised with the belief that life is all about giving back. The BNC's emphasis on social justice and education aligned deeply with her values. Lydia's passion for leadership and philanthropy found a perfect outlet in the BNC, where she has since played pivotal roles in fundraising and educational initiatives. Her passion for social justice and education mirrors Fanny Kemble's advocacy against slavery, making Lydia an ideal choice for this portrayal. With her background as a lecturer and a motivational speaker, Lydia's performance promises to capture both the spirit and the complexity of Kemble's life. Please welcome Lydia Axelrod, or better yet, Fanny Kemble.
Thank you, Nan. I really appreciate the lovely introduction. I would like you for a minute to suspend belief and pretend that you are at a meeting in 1849 in New England, and that you are rather upper middle class mill owners, and yet you believe in abolition. And Fanny Kemble has come to you today to tell you a bit about her life story, which is based on a real person who is extremely, extremely interested in the abolition movement. And so I will read to you a monologue that was performed in Broadway about 10 years ago. And a wonderful man at the Longwood residencies had seen the play. And we both enjoy reading to people. And so he said, just try this out. And I did. And I've been having not only the time of my life, but meeting wonderful people along the way. So hopefully we will now close our eyes for a minute and be transported to New England, where we are watching the lovely Mrs. Fanny Kemble. And here's an audience with Fanny Kemble. I am Fanny Kemble, London born, the most English of English women, from the most English of families, the Kemble Siddons family. My late aunt, Sarah Siddons, the splendid Mrs. Siddons, is still acclaimed as the greatest female interpreter of Shakespeare to ever grace a stage. my dear father, is Charles Kemble, to me the most accomplished actor of this century. My beautiful mother, Marie Therese de Camp, sang and danced and acted from her childhood, both in England and on the continent. She was much praised for her roles in comedy, particularly for Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew. Oh, but I assure you, she was a shrew on a stage only. All during my lifetime, my family's income has been subject to the varying fortunes of the Covent Garden Theatre. My father and my uncles were proprietors there, managers, you in America might say. The theatre seats 3,000 people, and the weekly payroll was for over 700, more at Christmas season. 2 decades ago, in 1829, Covent Garden fell into enormous debt. All of the employers, including my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and brothers, were to be set adrift. I had just returned to England from France, where I had completed boarding school. Authorship and scholarship appealed to me, and one evening, I asked my parents to allow me to seek employment as a governess. At the breakfast table the next morning, my father said, and I can remember his very words, "There is a fine fortune to be made just now by any young lady of decent talent on the stage." The financial disarray of Covent Garden had led me to believe that a fine fortune was to be made almost anywhere except on the stage. Nevertheless, my mother requested that I learn the potion speech of Juliet. And early the next morning, my father took me to the deserted Covent Garden to try my voice. I had no audience in the house, no Romeo on the stage. My dismal scene must act alone. I have a faint cold fear thrills through my veins that almost freezes up the heat of life. How if when I am laid into the tomb I wake before Romeo comes to redeem me? There's a fearful point. Shall I not then be stifled in the vault, to whose foul mouth no healthsome air breathes in, and there die strangled until my Romeo comes? My father determined to bring me out at once. Exactly 3 weeks later, I made my theatrical debut as Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. I had to be pushed bodily onto the stage, and would you believe not a word I uttered in the first 2 scenes was even audible? Then, in the 3rd scene, the balcony scene, the inspiration of the play washed over me, and I was completely carried away. At the end of the performance, there was tumultuous applause. Whole bouquets were thrown on the stage. My parents rejoiced and embraced me. They congratulated me and gave me a watch. In short, I was a great success. I had saved the Covent Garden from bankruptcy, and my professional life was determined. I came out in other roles that first season. I did Bianca in Fazio and Lady Teazle in The School for Scandal. Oh, and my favorite, Portia in The Merchant of Venice. I came out in other roles the first season. I did Bianca in Fazio and Lady Teazle in The School for Scandal, and all of it. And every night I played regardless of the role. The house was full, and off the stage, I was acclaimed the new young lioness of British society. The Prime Minister rode with me in Hyde Park. Lord Russell himself explained his great reform bill to me. I was waited on by Sir Walter Scott. I attended balls and danced till dawn. I had holidays in lovely country towns. I was even invited to the coronation and given Pierce tickets. But you're curious about me coming to America. Well, in 1832, an epidemic of cholera swept through the continent in Great Britain. The theater trade fell off. My father was about to declare himself insolvent when it was decided that he and I should cross and come to America for a tour of the northern cities. Oh, I was wretched at the thought of parting from my mother and my brothers, and from some particular admirers, too. But again, I bowed to the wishes of others. On the 1st of August in 1832, my father and I set sail from Liverpool and made New York Harbor in just 36 days. I came out in Fazio. The New York Evening Post said that I was perfection. And the Tribune said that my presence in this country would raise and refine the American act. Oh, I don't believe any of it. Of course we hadn't come here to raise and refine the American art. We had come here to earn money. And this we proceeded to do by working very hard. After New York, we went to Philadelphia. A genteel youth came to drink tea with us the day after we opened, and every day thereafter. He was well-spoken. He played the flute nicely. He had a large fortune. He was, in my eyes, a great man, in spite of his being short. He offered to go riding with me, and he provided quite tolerable horses for outings to Laurel Hill and along the Schuylkill River. And he sent me nosegays and violets and rosebuds and jasmine and orange flower. He always signed himself a Philadelphia friend, and I thought that very witty. From Philadelphia, we went to your nation's capital, and at the White House, my father and I were presented to the presidency. His Excellency Andrew Jackson, a fine specimen of a battered soldier, tall and erect. His manners were perfectly simple, and therefore perfectly good. It was springtime in Boston. My Philadelphia friend followed us there, so I continued to have flowers for my room and horses for my daily exercise. My going on the stage had been an act of duty to my parents, and I'm afraid that to me ours was still a strange trade. I longed for time to study and to write, despite which I had not thought that during my father's lifetime I would ever leave the stage. But I had not counted on our enormous success in America. In the spring of 1834, I was able to give over sufficient of my American earnings to provide for the support of my parents in their old age. I announced my decision to leave the stage and to marry my Philadelphia friend, Mr. Pierce Butler. On the 7th of June, Pierce and I were married at 8 o'clock in the morning at Christ Church in Philadelphia. My father returned to a tranquil life in England, and I went to play the housewife at the Butler family seat, an unpretentious country house 6 miles outside of Philadelphia. I found much to do in managing a small domain. I superintended the painting of the house, the fitting up of the furniture. I laid out flower beds and gravel walks. I planted trees, over 200 of them, quince trees and pear trees, and a lane of poplar trees leading to our simple threshold. I was also occupied editing and copying a journal of my travels. At the request of a Philadelphia publisher, I was preparing it for the press. Pierce read it and pronounced it the private diary of a very young lady, unfit for public eyes. Oh, but I dismissed the remark with a merry laugh. I could not believe that my husband would want to hinder the presentation of any work of mine which I should judge proper for exposure to the general readership. Consequently, the book was published in Philadelphia and London and France. I intended to use some of the proceeds to buy myself a horse, a particular black saddle horse named Forrester. Then I learned of the Pennsylvania law, which decrees that all of a wife's earnings go directly to her spouse. To my chagrin, Pierce was the legal beneficiary of the considerable commercial success which my writings reaped, whether he approved of them or not. I still cannot persuade myself that which I invent, I create, can belong to anyone but myself. Oh, how I wish that women could be dealt with, not mercifully, not compassionately, but with justice, for justice. On May 28, 1835, I gave birth to a strong, healthy baby girl, Sally. I gave birth to another baby girl, Fan, exactly 3 years later, in the same month, the same day, and with the same hour. Now that was very orderly of me, wasn't it? Soon after Fan was born, while I was still nursing her, I traveled with my husband and our two babies and our faithful Irish nurse babe, Marjorie O'Brien, to the Sea of Islands of Georgia. Pierce had recently come into extensive rice and cotton plantations there at the mouth of the Altahama River. The family into which I married were large slave owners, a fact of which I knew nothing when I married Pierce Butler. Our trip from Philadelphia to Georgia took 10 days and nights. We traveled on 4 filthy railroad lines, 3 overcrowded steamboats, and 1 ramshackle stagecoach. As we moved into the South, the presence of Marjorie O'Brien and our party caused considerable confusion. The people there had no concept of a white person performing any of the duties of a servant. In the South, labor of any kind was reserved for whites alone. At dawn on the last day of the year, we arrived at the mouth of the Altahama River. Our family party transferred into a narrow, long boat, and 10 sable oarsmen, our slaves, rowed us into an arm of the Altahama. As we neared the low, reedy banks of Butler Island, the steersman took up a large conch shell, and in the barbaric fashion of ancient times, sounded out our approach. From the sedges, a profusion of wildfowl started up. On the wharf, scores of Negroes jumped and danced. They clapped their hands and whistles and cried, "Massa, Massa, me so glad to see you. Massa, how you be? Oh, Massa, where you get those alabaster babies?" On our landing, we were pulled and pushed and dragged and all but lifted in the air by the clamorous multitude. Negroes seized my cloak and kissed it. They embraced Sally and Fan. They grabbed Pierce's hand and almost wrung them off. They hailed us ecstatically, as if we were descending divinities. Many years ago, after you Americans had so successfully established your independence among nations, Pierce's grandfather laid out the plantation with the assistance of an expert in land reclamation from the Netherlands. The whole island is really a swamp, crossed by dikes that divide it into rice fields. It contains several thousand acres and is about 8 miles round. It is said to be one of the largest rice plantations in America. When we arrived in Butler Island, there was no master's dwelling, as no master had been in residence for over 2 years. 2 generations, actually. So we inhabited the house used by our overseer, Mr. King. We had 3 small rooms, one for sitting and eating, one for our bedroom, and an attic chamber for Marjorie O'Brien and the babies. All of the doors opened by wooden latches raised by bits of packet thread, like the door in Little Red Riding Hood. The furniture was made on the island by our own carpenters. White pine wood, very plain but neat, a settee, a table, a few chairs, washstands, and clothes presses. The few small windows were glazed, but even when closed, they admitted perfect gusts of wind. On blowy evenings, the single carpet in the sitting room undulated like the stage effect of the ocean in agitation. Adjoining our bedroom was a closet, which opened out of the doors. This was Pierce's dressing room and cabinet affairs. There he shaved and conducted his plantation business. Two other closets served as Overseer King's office and bedroom. An overseer, you see, is treated as one of the family. That first day, Overseer King presented our servants to us, those who had been selected to wait upon us in the house. Our housekeeper, Molly, known as House Molly, to distinguish from all the other Mollys on the estate. Our footmen, or waiters as you call them, two lads, 15 or 16 years old, Hector and Alexander. When I first met them, their hands and faces and clothes and naked feet were so encrusted with dirt, and their attendance on our table was not particularly agreeable to me. We had a washerwoman and a dairywoman, and a young woman named Psyche served as a kid of under-nursemaid, an assistant to our Marjorie. Marjorie O'Brien's presence caused as much confusion on Butler Island as it had during our trip. The Negroes treated her as sort of second mistress. They spoke of her as of the Missy. They spoke of me as the right Missy. Our first evening, Overseer King described the system of labor, which is universal in that part of the South. The slaves are divided into gangs, such as the honorable term. There are gangs of field hands and gangs of artisans. The field hands are the majority, and they're the more brutish of the tribe. The artisans exhibit more intellect, and many are indeed exceedingly expert at their trades. There is the gang of carpenters and a gang of bricklayers, a gang of blacksmiths, fabricate all of the iron supplements for field and hearth which are used on the estate. And a gang of coopers make the delicately fragrant wooden barrels for the rice crop. At the head of each Negro field gang is a driver. The task system is enforced, and each day the driver assigns a task to each man and woman under him. Once that task is completed, the rest of the 24 hours are allowed to labor, to use as he or she pleases. The Negro head of the drivers was Headman Frank. Headman Frank, like Othello, at the commencement of his great tragedy, a man of constant and noble nature, with a great dignity, would make things far more fair than black. I often watched Headman Frank as he contemplated the broad river, which for him is a prison wall, as well as the boundary of his own dominion. Headman Frank is, you understand, frequently the sole governor of the island. During the spring and summer, Overseer King goes to mainland every night, away from the deadly malaria of the rice swamp. And throughout the year, the overseer is regularly absent for a week or more, attending to the Butler cotton plantation for several miles distant on St. Simon's Island. At such times, Headman Frank exercises all functions of undisputed mastery over his fellow slaves. He has the keys to all the stores and gives out the people's rations. He appoints the work and announces and pronounces punishment. Yet Headman Frank remains quite as much a slave as any of the rest. He can be flogged at any time by Overseer King, and he can be sold like a cart horse by Mr. Butler. Headman Frank's wife is Betty, a trim, tidy, sad-looking woman with a pretty figure, although by no means young, and their youngest son is Renty, an unusual boy with a decided air of superiority. He has so light a complexion and such straight features that I would have taken him for a European, a Southern European perhaps, because of his tatters, a gypsy. I recall hearing Overseer King describe Hedman Frank as an admirable worker with quite the principles of a white man. Overseer King is not unperceptive, nor is he indolent. He is, in fact, a man of extraordinary energy and activity. Overseer explained, "There are over 700 slaves on this estate, and they're all regularly fed 2 meals a day, rice and corn grits. They're clothed every year. Each slave is given 2 pairs of shoes, plus several yards of flannel, and as many more plains." Plains is a stout woolen fabric which resembles a kind of carpet. The slaves on this estate are not hired out to other masters. They're not bought and sold. Members of families are not parted for life. And they're not brutally beaten, no ma'am. The rules of punishment on Butler Island were laid down many years ago by Mr. Butler's grandfather. In the field, a driver is allowed to inflict 12 lashes upon any refractory slave at the time of the offense. The headman has the power to inflict 3 lashes, the overseer up to 50. As for the master, there are of course no limits. Ma'am, the slaves on Butler Island consider themselves well off. They especially appreciated that are provided with tolerable habitation, and there's an infirmary for their care. As soon as I learned there was an infirmary, I determined to go to it. Early the next morning, I set out on foot. To mount horseback was impossible because of the swampy nature of the island. During my stay in Georgia, I kept a journal of my daily life. I entered an account of that infirmary visit. If you'll permit me, I should like to read it to you. This is it, my journal, Butler Island, on the Sea Islands of Georgia, on the Atlantic coast. January 1st, 1839. The infirmary is a large whitewashed building. I entered the first of its 4 rooms. It was damp and dark and dirty. Some 24 women huddled on the clammy earth floor. Some expected at every hour the agonies of childbirth. Some had just brought their offspring into the world. Some groaned under the anguish of miscarriage. Many shook with cold. Others burned with fever. I stood in the midst of the stench and the noise, perfectly unable to speak. Tears poured from my eyes. As I recovered myself, I addressed old Rose, the midwife in charge of this room. I bade her open the shutters of such windows as were glazed and let in the light. I then proceeded to make up a fire. I mentioned, But upon my lifting aloft, old Rose emitted an outcry of horror. "Missy, what you lift low? You got blacks enough to do that?" Whereupon I gave my views of the purposes for which hands and arms are appended to my body. Among the sick women, I recognized Charlotte, a tall, gaunt negress who had embraced Sally and Fan with much zeal upon our arrival. Besides being ill herself, she was nursing a sick baby. I addressed remonstrances to her about the horrible duty and condition and the awful way her child was acting. She told me it was impossible for her to keep any of her children clean, that she went out to work at daybreak and did not complete her task until night. Then she was too worn out to do anything but throw herself down and sleep. I told Charlotte that I would mention her predicament to my husband. She urged me to not do that, saying, "Let Missy, let be." I left the refuge for our sick dependents, with my clothes dank with moisture and covered with vermin. I returned home, where I described my chagrin about the condition of the infirmary to Pierce and to Overseer King. But Overseer King responded, "The infirmary does appear to require reform, and such has been proposed, but there being no encouragement from the owners, it's been assumed to be a matter of indifference." I mentioned Charlotte's statement about not having time to keep her babies clean. Overseer King assured me it was not so. The next day, I took off for the infirmary again. This time I chose a route through the camp nearest our house. There are 4 camps on the island, each consists of a dozen or so cabins, and a cook shop where the daily rations are boiled in a huge cauldron. I called at one of the cabins. It was a mere wooden frame, pinned to the earth by a brick chimney. I entered the single room. It was about 12 by 15 feet, with 2 tiny cupboards for sleeping. 2 families, 2 large families, one of 7 people and one of 10 people resided in it. There were no chairs or table, no furniture of any kind. Rags, shavings, chicken, filth littered the floor. A group of half-naked children, all with babies on their backs, covered around 2 or 3 cinders. When the nurses are in the field, the older children act as little nurses. They watch over the babies and carry them to the mothers to be nourished. I bade these little nurses tend the fire and sweep the floor. Then I set myself to expelling the poultry. I proclaimed to all the little nurses that I would give 1 cent to every child whose baby's face should be clean, and 1 cent there to every individual with a clean face and hands of his or her own. My appeal was fully comprehended by the majority. Subsequently, whenever I emerged from the front door, I was surrounded by swarms of children, their little chargers on their backs, all with shining, and in many cases still wet faces and hands. Thus did I ingeniously introduce hygiene into the island. On my second visit to the infirmary, I found there had been some faint attempt at cleaning the place. Charlotte, however, was weeping bitterly. I asked her what ailed her, more by signs than words. She informed me that Overseer King had flogged her. Why, I asked. For having complained to me that she had not time to wash her babies. I returned to the house immediately. I told Pierce about the beating of Charlotte. I said the people should not be chastised for anything they said to me. My husband assured me he would ask Overseer King about it. Accordingly, at dinner, the inquiry was made. Overseer King answered, "Miss Banner, when I inspected the infirmary this morning, I saw that Charlotte's condition was such that she was clearly able to work. I ordered her into the field, but she said she was too ill and that once in the field she'd be unable to work. I told her I knew better. She replied, 'Very well, I go, but I'll just come back.' I replied, 'You care nothing about sick slaves. For you black people are tools. If they can be easily mended, you fix them, but if not, you fling them aside as useless.' After that, I went to the infirmary every day. I washed babies and I bathed women. I picked lice from woolly heads and removed fleas from black bodies. I scrubbed infected arms and legs, and I cleaned stumps on what had once been hands and feet. Luckily, I have a strong stomach, and I'm not a fainting woman. But I wish to God I had spent more time studying the human body and the uses of medicine, and less time learning to dance and play the piano. Oh, but the music on Butler Island, I've yet to tell you about the music. The field hands and the boatmen, and indeed the craftsmen, often accompany their labor with song, chants, and choruses that with very little adaptation could make a fortune in some opera. The Negroes' voices are almost all tenor, and they always sing in unison, never in parts. Usually the melody is intoned by a single voice, and between each phrase, the rest strike in with the verse. It's very curious and very affecting. The times and accents are quite wonderful. They were new to me, but many of the tunes were familiar, variations of Scotch and Irish airs I've known since childhood. During my stay, I was constantly besieged by petitioners. I recorded the people's requests in my journal. Hence, a day in February from my journal. Silky, Quambie's wife, comes to implore that the rule be altered, which sends the women back to work in the field hours after they give birth. She has had 2 miscarriages, 4 children born, all but her new baby dead. Young Morris the blacksmith asks permission to be baptized. Earlier, Betty Hedman, Frank's wife, had come to me with an similar request. She told me she had several times asked Overseer King for permission for the ceremony, but she had never been able to contain or get his consent. Dorcas, Bush's wife, came to beg that her field work will be lightened. She has had 4 miscarriages and is suffering with weakness of the back and incessant flooding. I referred some of these matters to my husband, although he complained that I ought not to listen to such trash from the flat. Many of the petitioners I was able to satisfy myself. Alexander, our waiter, had a request, which I did not note in my journal, nor mention to my husband. Alec and his kindred had always been house servants for the overseers. The effect was evident in Alec's uncommon intelligence and good-tempered reasonableness and mannerliness. And under my tutelage, he had become a first-rate footman. Now he asked me if I would teach him to read. I wanted to do it, but it would have been quite simply breaking the law. Penalties for teaching a slave to read were very severe. Heavy fines, imprisonment, death. I did, however, teach Alec to read. I gave classes to Alec and to my Sally together. We started with Mother Goose's nursery rhymes. Alec was a quick and attentive student, and he took extreme interest in his new alphabetical lore. Sally, I'm sorry to say, lagged behind the lad in interest and in attainment. Does my defiance of the local legislation show an unyielding spirit? But unrighteous laws are made to be broken. I obeyed a higher authority. From my journal, March 13th, 1833. I'm taking my breakfast alone in the parlor when Renty enters. He asks to be relieved of field work and be allowed to learn a trade, citing his white blood. I say, Renty, what do you mean, your white blood? Who is your mother? Betty Hedman's Frank's wife. Right, and then who is your father? Overseer King. Did your mother tell you that? No, the other children told me. I expect they know. Old Rose, midwife, confirmed the story. She said Overseer King borrowed Betty long after Betty's marriage to Edmund King had taken place. I think this history explains Betty's melancholy demeanor and Hedman Frank's sober, sometimes even sullen manner. In my journal I wrote, Old Rose that day came asking to be allowed to present her granddaughter, Louisa. She explained that Louisa had only recently been forgiven by the overseer for an attempt to run away. I had Lisa shown in. She was a slender slip of a lassie. I asked her to tell me her story. One day, while working in a rice field, Louisa had fallen ill. She was unable to complete her task. For that, Driver Brand, the Negro head of a gang, reprimanded her severely. The next day, she was again unable to finish her work. This time, Driver Brand said he would tie her up. Tie you up, Louisa? What is that? She said they were fastened by their wrists to a beam or a tree branch, their feet barely touching the ground so as to allow no purchase to avoid the lash. Their clothes were turned over their heads. Their backs were scored with a leather thong by the driver himself, or by any man he chose, father, brother, husband, lover. At that threat, Louisa ran into the swamp. But the rattlesnakes, Louisa, the dreadful rattlesnakes, were you not afraid? No, Missy, me no think of them. Me forget all about them for the fretting. Why did you return at all? Oh, Missy, we starved with hunger. Me almost dead with hunger before me come back. And me go to hospital and me so sick so long. Driver Brand, he forget all about the tying up. At this point, O Rose intervened. What use black man run away? This swamp is all around. They get in there and they starve to death, or the snakes eat them up. Better they stay home and get a flogging. Better they stay home and let Massa force them. Better they stay home and take the tying up. Blacks here don't never run away. No, Missy, they don't never run away. I really thought the slaves might retaliate at such things. I really thought I should consider my own throat and those of my children well cut at some pitchy dark night. The people decided to clear of scores in that fashion. I wonder they do not rise up like Caliban and howl, "Farewell, master, farewell, farewell. No more dams I'll make for fish, nor fetch and firing as requiring, nor scrape trencher, nor wash dish. Ban, 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 Caliban. Got no master, got no man. Freedom, heyday, heyday. Freedom, freedom, heyday, freedom." There are no more entries in my journal. The next day was the last day of March. That morning, my husband summoned me into the dressing room and he told me, "Blacks are all damn liars." He refused to receive any more petitions from me, and he ordered me to cease meddling in the business of the estate. In that moment, I perceived that the physical misery of the slave has as its counterpart the moral wretchedness of the master. We commenced to break up the household on Butler Island. I was not born among slaves, and I could not live with them among them, condemned to see and hear such suffering, without the means to alleviate it, without the right even to present it for alleviation. On April 20th, Mr. Butler, Sally and Fan, Marjorie O'Brien and I rode away from those properties. Our oarsmen chanted and turned to their labor. We returned to Philadelphia. There I received a request from the National Anti-Slavery Standard that I prepare portions of my Georgian journal for publication. I was undecided what to do. I considered that it might be dishonorable breach of hospitality for me to make public my observation of the Butler family properties. Mr. Butler, however, was clear about what he should do. He presented to the Court of Common Pleas of the city of Philadelphia a prayer for absolute divorce from the bond of matrimony. In his brief, he claimed that I am guilty of wild and malicious conduct, which rendered me unfit to habitate with him without children. He further stated that an insuperable bar to our marriage is formed by opinions on Negro slavery. He said that when it comes to the publication of such sentiments, he must offer his unqualified opposition. At the same time, Mr. Butler issued his hateful private statement about our life together. Despite the mortifying circumstances of my domestic life, I dreaded the stigma of divorce, and I was in terror of the court's authority over my children. The court rendered its decision. The divorce is granted. Under its terms, I was for 10 months of the year excluded from the care and company of my children. The companionship of all young people was charming to me, and I delighted in my daughters. So my circumstances were lonely, but not idle. I could in no wise afford to be idle. I prepared my public reading of the plays of Shakespeare in addition. I realized that I was obligated to take on the editing of my Georgian journal for publication, a most arduous task indeed. But it was my duty to make known what I witnessed the day-to-day workings of the slavery system from the midst of it. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And I hope you appreciated my performance. And thank you, Gail. I want to hold out a special thank you to her for making this introduction for me. I enjoyed it very much.